Why, hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm Random Randy, and today I've got a treat for you all. We're going to look into technology, namely firearms. We're looking into technology here because there's kind of a disconnect between what currently is and is in use and how it came to be, right? We do see like a major shift in patents and things in the 1900s, the way those were filed, possible burning down of patent offices prior to that, removing all previous claims to some of this technology. Now, one of those that I find fascinating is the electric rifle or the electric gun. Now, when I say electric, the interesting thing to note is that this is not the 1865 Gatling gun, right? Which most of us are probably familiar with from movies like The Last Samurai and several others. But is actually an electric gun that was presented in 1845. Now, in 1845, this gun was called the Siva or the Shiva, right? Because it was known as the Destroyer. Now, it was made by Mr. Benningfield, and this is an example here that we're looking at on the screen. Now, the first successful machine gun designs were developed in the mid 19th century. Key characteristic is a high rate of fire. We are pretty familiar with the 1860s Gatling guns, right? Now, these were all powered by hand, so they were mechanically operated. What we're looking at here is an electrically operated machine gun or Gatling gun, basically. So, there's some speculation as to did we inherit a lot of technology? Did the folks before us leave us a lot of things, or inadvertently, as they left or died off, did they leave us with pieces of technology that we've done then dug up and claimed as our own and used? This is one of those weird things. Now, I think that it could be that, or it could just be that a lot about the 17 and 1800s is clearly hidden from us. Who the revolutionaries actually were in the 1700s, I think, is up for debate. And so this is just one of those things. This is one of those things that doesn't make a lot of sense. There's not really a lot of background. It conveniently pops up in 1845, right after the transitions of the early 1800s and late 1700s, right before the Civil War, right? So this is a machine gun, an electric machine gun in 1845 that is created by Mr. Benningfield, and it was referred to as the electric gun. Now, the interesting things about this is that this thing weighed like half a ton. Okay. So it would take several horses to pull. And so it was very heavy. And you can see kind of by the demonstration here that it looks quite bulky. And I would imagine underneath all of this very nice kind of facade here, which is maybe made of wood or cast iron, that there is significant mechanical workings going on inside of here that allow this to work. So very steampunk-esque, right? And I think that that's part of our history that's being hidden from us is the incredible analog nature of this steampunk type era that once existed here in this realm, on this world. So, that being said, there are several different notations to this gun. One in Mechanics Magazine, 1845. Now, this is where you find a lot of information are in the current events magazines of the time. Like I was saying, Mechanics Magazine. We also have another one in Living Age, 1845. Now, in the Farmer's Almanac of 1845, it says this: a new engine of destruction. Mr. Benningfield of Jersey has, as we understand, after a very lengthened period, employed in constructing an electric gun, succeeding in completing his object, which he denominates a Siva. I think that it's more like Shiva or Destroyer, right? He has exhibited several times and demonstrated its amazing effects, which are most destructive. The continuous and rapid flight of balls discharged is scarcely credible. Now, that's another interesting thing. It doesn't talk about him using cartridges or bullets as we understand them. It's talking about um, shot, just balls, right? And the size of these is massive. We're talking 5/8 of an inch, so that's upwards of 60 caliber. And now we see a very similar size ammunition coming around in the Gatling gun. It's about a half inch, 50 caliber, sometimes up to zero point 0.7. Okay. So we see that kind of coming out mainstream about 15 or 20 years later. So the simplicity of this wonderful work of mechanical art as a projectile is such that it can be easily removed from place to place. So it's on wheels. Um, it contains within itself the means of continuing to an indefinite period its power and capability of destruction. A dozen of these guns would rapidly thin and even annihilate an opposing force were it never so well maneuvered. So that's in the Farmer's Almanac. So this is what they're telling the masses in the mid 1800s, right before the time of the Civil War. So all of these fantastic machines of death are coming about supposedly out of nowhere, really. Like, well, this is just some dude who, has a wild hair to create this electric gun, this, destroyer. And we'll get into the 1905 stuff here in a minute. But so it's very interesting, to say the least, right? Now, Mr. Benningfield was very stubborn. So he impressed all of these people showing this in action, but never filed the patent. Nobody really knows what happened to him, of course, right? He just kind of disappears. We see kind of things like that happening a lot now. So it was demonstrated in 1845, firing lead balls 35 yards downrange. All that saw it were amazed, including the Duke of Wellington. Um, so they petition him about the workings of his weapon. He's very reluctant to cooperate with them, refusing to allow anybody to inspect the weapon. He never told anyone how it worked, other than saying that it used electricity. Now, we don't know if it used electricity in the sense that instead of, a firing cap, it was using a spark to ignite gunpowder, or that it was using electricity as a specific means of propulsion for these rounds. Um, and that's the thing that's kind of interesting is at 1,000 rounds per minute, that stuff, if you're using conventional shot and conventional, you know, guns, or sorry, gunpowder, this will get very hot. I mean, you would have to have a large number of barrels, but we don't see that here. We just see one barrel in this demonstration, the electric gun, the Shiva, right? We just see one barrel. So, in order to fire that many rounds, there is definitely a mechanism taking place that we don't understand, that we don't see happening here. So, now, fast forward to 1883, and we have a Mr. Clare, a Paris engineer, having an electric gun of his invention, right? Conveniently, 20 years later, sorry, 40 years later, almost. This is in 1883 in The Electrician that this article comes from. The gun is a breech loader, metallic cartridges are used. So you see where the modification was made, the changeover from essentially electric to kinetic, or explosive laden cartridge, right? So there was a transition there was an adaptation of this technology um in that 40-year period. So that's what took 40 years for this stuff to come out, was they had retrofitted it to utilize a supposedly relatively new set of gunpowders and things like this, modeling it very much after a musket, but being muzzle loader, or I'm sorry, breech loader, as opposed to muzzle loader. So metallic cartridges are used again in 1883, but instead of having a cap, it has a copper wire which runs through a wad and an eye and is connected with a platina wire. When the button is pressed, the current. So this is what I was just talking about. This one is using electricity specifically as a means, and I think that this is probably a really good uh, rendition here. This is 40 years after the one we were just speaking of. This is the electric gun that then comes out. And basically, so it's just fired with a battery. That's That's how it's working. Okay. So the barrel may contain several cartridges, which may be fired off successively. If you've ever gone out and fired a 22 hunting rifle, you know that you can have some barrel loaded uh, through the back end of the gun. You can load your ammunition. You can have a stripper clip that has 5 rounds, and it's technically in the barrel. It's in the grip, but there it is. So you can see the difference in what was portrayed in the 1840s versus the 1880s. Now, so again, this is the French version from Mr. Clare here that we have on screen. So, some more interesting things 1854, so midway in between, we have the War Office is offered by a successful quote a successful inventor an electric rifle, which greatly surpasses any weapon in use, flinging a ball from 1,000 to 2,000 feet at a rate of 60 shots per minute. So I think that this is another adaptation of the first one that we were looking at. So, and then it goes on to 1866, where this one we have on screen is actually the version from 1866. So sorry about that. But um and this is also French. All right. So it's interesting. We see a really weird kind of backwards curve happen, going from electric to like kinetic or explosive generated force. So now what's interesting about the LeBaron and Delmas rifle, the one on screen, is it was built as a prototype and demonstrated, but failed to receive any funding. Right. So just languished as a concept. Here's what's really interesting about this. Keep in mind, this is the 1860s. Now, the rifle was chambered for specifically designed magnetic cartridges housed in the weapon stock as a potassium ion battery connected to an induction coil. The coil led to the chamber, and upon pulling the trigger, the battery would generate an electrical charge, which would travel up the coil and ignite the chambered bullet. The system was innovative, but did not seem to offer a direct advantage over a conventional hammer or striker. So essentially, they couldn't, it was fancy, it was neat, but they already had the infrastructure in place to create cartridges and things like that by the time this really rolled out. So there's some weird shift in technology and things happening in the 1800s. What that is, I can't pretend to understand, but I'm definitely enjoying looking into it. So now we fast forward to the early 20th century, right? And we have some patents finally coming out. What's interesting is the electromagnetic gun is a patent by Christian Birkeland. Where do we know Christian Birkeland from? Oh, from the term Birkeland current, right? So this is much like many, 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 many people in our history. This is somebody that these inventions are being attributed to, like en masse. Okay. We're not hearing anything about, Mr. Benningfield, who originally came out with the electric gun. But what we do hear about is the patent going through the War Office. We hear about LeBaron and Delmas in 1866, putting this specific gun out. And then fast forward, and we hear of Christian Birkeland in 1904 creating the electromagnetic gun or railgun. Now, what I'm proposing is that the first firearm we were speaking of, this actually was a railgun, as opposed to your typical standard firearm. So the scale of Birkeland's research enterprises was such that funding became an overwhelming obstacle. Apparently, not for long. This man was up there, right? But recognizing the technological invention could bring wealth, he developed an electromagnetic cannon and with some investors formed a firearms company. Now, the coil gun worked, except the muzzle velocities he predicted were not produced. The most that he could get from his largest machine was 100 meters per second. Uh, so, not very good. And let's take a look and see what that looked like here. We'll shift you right over here. Okay. So you see there's a lot of mechanism happening here. There's a lot going on. So is that what was hidden, within this Possibly, right? So, um, now, and you know, we keep moving forward, and we come to 1911, and we have a supposed work of fiction, the history of, you know, the taser, like, so electric rifle or electric weapons, or maybe you call them lasers, or what have you. You know that the first electromagnetic weapons were fictionally portrayed in 1911, right? And this is right around the same time we have H.G. Wells pumping out all his goodies and everything else. Um, and then you go to 1932, and wow, look at this new thing, guys. Electric cannon uses no gunpowder. You know, so everything like re-rolled out. We had a weird reverse engineer phase. Really makes you wonder, where did all this stuff come from? Who were those people? Like, were they just the past? Uh, you know, and why did we feel we had to shrink things down and de-electrify things, and you know, everything became man powered for like 100 years, which is kind of strange, you know, when in the 1800s we could have had this, right, almost 100 years before. So, you know, it's interesting. And this is in 1933, that this electric gun here. Okay. And this Texan builds novel electric gun, giant projectiles pulled at terrific velocities through powderless cannon by magnetism, leaving the barrel with scarcely more noise than that made by a 22 rifle, may set new problems for rangefinders. The electric gun invented and patented by Virgil Rigsby of St. Augustine, Texas, similar to an electric motor with the field poles unrolled. So this is a railgun, guys. Okay. uh you know, and getting into death ray, right? So this is something else that is portrayed as Nikola Tesla kind of, you know, coming out with this theoretical electric death beam, particle ray. um you know, notable inventors, Guglielmo Marconi, Nikola Tesla, Harry Grindle Matthews, Edwin Scott, Graken, and others claim to have invented it independently in 1957. But what do we see? You know, what do we see going on back here in the 1800s? We see some very interesting things happening. So it really makes me wonder what's going on there. So fast forward to the 1930s, right before World War II, the German death ray pistol stuns animals at a mile range. An odd-looking pistol firing a magnesium charge said to be capable of stunning men and animals a mile away is now being demonstrated in Paris. And don't you find it strange that all of this stuff kind of comes to fruition in Paris, France? Everything from Napoleon to radio to, I mean, you name it. Paris is the place for it, right? What if Paris was just the last remnant that was successfully taken over and adapted to the new paradigm from the previous? So maybe we'll call it as close to the old world as you can get, you know, without all the destruction, even though we see destruction in Paris, don't get me wrong. Um, so there's something to be said about the French. What was really going on? What were the politics like? You know, we know what we're told in school. It doesn't seem to match up with, you know, the technological curve or any of this other thing. So, and then, you know, so that's just one. Let's take a look, or I'll show you guys real quick. Okay. German death ray pistol stuns animals at mile range. Now, this looks like a typical sci-fi pistol, right? Like with the, you know, little satellite dish and everything. And you know what this looks like to me, guys, to be quite honest, is these things they have now mounted, sonic weapons mounted on a you know, on these like police person carrier things, right? Let's see if I can find you a quick one here. So this, guys, right? So this is the stun ray. Okay. Fast forward to modern time, and there's your stun ray. All right. So this stuff was rolled out at a deliberate pace, much like all technology that we're seeing being rolled out at a you know, very deliberate pace. Now, what's, oh man, there, you know, back in this early 1900s, we have another example of death ray, and says that this death ray kills at 6 miles. Henry Claudel of Bourges, France, is the inventor of this new death ray machine, shown here with the apparatus, which has been proven to be highly satisfactory. So, all these people out there talking about, well, no, we need our firearms and this and that. Do you really think that it's going to matter if, these people that have all this technology decide, like, oh, let's get rid of those people with all their guns or whatever, like, or let's just have a standoff with them or whatever. Do you really think that your AR-15 is going to help you? Because I really don't. I mean, there's so much evidence nowadays, and some might call it lack of evidence. I mean, we're looking at some weird, electro ray gun type of happenings, fires, different things. So it's crazy, and now this guy um will kill any living thing at a distance of 10 kilometers or approximately 6.25 miles. This guy's death ray. So if this was invented in like the 1930s, why would it be a far cry to be able to have, whether you think of it as in space or in the sky, on a balloon or on a satellite, a particle weapon or a beam, a death ray, right? A few miles above, just laying waste to things or starting fires. Why is that such a stretch for some people? We see the technology exists, right? And then there's like so much of this in the early, 1930s rather. Um, Death ray invented by Cleveland scientists. So I mean, it just goes on and on. There's one, two, three supposed inventors of this death ray. So it's almost like they come out with this stuff, they get bought out by the man or whatever, uh and uh and then you don't hear about them anymore, much like the water operated vehicle, right? So death ray machine is on exhibition at the California Pacific International Exposition being held in San Diego. See, I did not know that this death ray was on exhibit, you know what I mean, on exhibit in one of these expositions. So these expositions, guys, they really are demonstrating all of the really cool stuff that they're not going to let us have. And I think that this goes on to this day. You go to exhibitions, you go to conventions, you go to these things, and you see like cutting edge this or cutting edge that, and then you never see it the rest of your life. Well, it's their way of showing us that the things exist. And guess what? When we don't push for them, we don't speak about them, we don't act as though we want them in our lives. We decide maybe that we would rather have conventional war because it's a fun game a lot of people like to play or something like that. So the death rays never really come to fruition. However, they may very well be being used to set the stage certain times. One example comes up is 2001 New York, right? This technology exists. It's nothing new, nothing new whatsoever. So, how crazy is that? Now, again, it's attributed to another person. A death ray which proved its effectiveness before San Francisco jury has been developed by Henry Fleur, Pacific Coast inventor. The apparatus, which employs a light beam impregnated with infrared rays, successfully killed a snake in 8.5 minutes. So, it's a glorified magnifying glass, and this is what they come out and tell us: hey, here's your death ray. It'll slowly cook something, okay? But if they're showing us the slow cook, what happens if they turn it up? You know what I mean? It functions at a low power output. um so it's weird, right? And then we have examples of the Nazi using a death ray, Rome reports. All right. Can exterminate any living creature in a radius of 1,000 feet. So then we have Henry Grindell Matthews in 1924, his death ray being publicly tested in London, looking very Tesla-esque, right? So, you got to ask yourself, guys, is somebody using this technology? Why do these look like beehives? Very interesting stuff. Japan's top secret weapon inspired by Tesla's death ray. So these things exist, guys. Just because they're not being used, in modern times, right? You know, and fair use on this. I'll probably have to post that up, uh, briefly here, and I will. I'll just let you guys take a look at this death ray real quick. The first device. So, in 1792, radio was invented. That's not the story we get. Just saying. You know what I mean? Just saying, guys. Hmm? So, they got to roll out all of that. Very interesting. Anyway, let's jump over here real quick. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, fair use. Because we're going to take a look at this video. We'll wrap up right after this. But so Grindel Matthews, the inventor of the death ray. And boy, they slap his name up there so many times. Let's allow. Just interesting. Lies were fed stories. It's all just stories, guys. You don't take it too personally all the time. Get up in arms about all the stories were taught and how superhero stories. It's a good spaces. And when the stories stop making sense, it's up to us. We write them for ourselves, right? You want to let other people rewrite the stories for you? You want to write them for yourself. So, is this the reason why they kind of got rid of airships? Were airships too easily downed by these type of weapons, which were very easily ground-based, especially stationary, right? Kind of like this. Or is it remind me of like Archimedean death ray, right? Giant magnifying glasses, known from airships, burning everything up. So, and here was the prediction: within 15 years, a machine gun will be found in museums. But personally, I think the machine gun is just far too fun to use. But people don't want to get rid of it. That's my opinion. You may have your own. So, incredible stuff, and this is just one of the many, many stories that don't quite match. They don't quite make sense. They don't quite match with what was going on. But then again, in this late 1700s, early 1800s, we have this transition to the corporation of America, to the world being a corporate entity, right? Whereas previous to this, we had these guilds. Excuse me, we had these guilds. We had these groups of merchants, groups of different types of people, possibly even back then all being part of a Masonic or builder type, instigator type group behind the scene. So, you've got to understand that humans have certain tendencies, and our tendency seems to be driven towards like the decimation of each other. I don't think that was always the case. Now, was it ever anything like what we see, in the stories that are coming around of Tartaria and this utopian kind of society? I don't know if it's ever that, guys, to be quite honest. But it's a thought. It's a thought. It's definitely a wish of a lot of us that beautiful utopia. I think that the society that we are thinking of is much further in the past than we can really understand. It's not back in the 1600s. It's not in the 1500s. We're talking very, very serious amount of what we know as time in the past. I think that we are there on the way I'll tell you why, because it definitely seems that the power structure that's in place now is nothing new. It's had many faces before. What we see now is just the newest face, the newest name, and some have put that out there as being like Shadow Rome. I just think it's the man. You can look at it as the man, right? There has and probably always will be a group representing control, right? And this control, not to sound like super, I don't know, Kabbalistic or whatever you want to call what I'm about to say. These mechanisms are supposed to be, not always, does it come out that way. They're supposed to be driving us towards growth on an individual kind of spiritual level. Now, has it gotten out of hand? Has the power gone to some of these people's heads? Sure. And I think that has happened in the past also. But we're at a time right now where we have an opportunity to reclaim or kind of stand up for ourselves and decide what we push forward into the future. And I think that these people in charge, they understand that too. And that's, why a lot of people kind of shy away from taking the responsibility for us to build our own future, right? It's going to take an army, like literally it's going to take all of us deciding, hey, this is the story that we want to push forward of our past in order to instigate this future that we want. Okay, so just a thought there, and I'm really glad to have been able to bring this to everybody's attention. And it's wild stuff, and there's more. There's so much more that doesn't make sense, so much more that makes a different line of sense than what we thought. It's amazing, guys. It's absolutely amazing. And I will leave the link to this here in the description. So thank you everybody for tuning in. And once again, this has been Random Randy coming at you. And if you like what you're seeing, reading, if you're picking up what I'm laying down, drop us a like, subscribe, shoot some comments, let us know your thoughts. It's fun to have these conversations with everybody. I'm really, really enjoying the feedback that has been coming. And we get rolling up to a certain point. Maybe if folks decide they would like to contribute, there will be a method for that. But as of yet, we're not going to worry about that. So anyway, much love to everybody out there. I hope this information finds you well, and have a great rest of your day.